Hey everybody, it's Drew from 198 Methods. There's been a lot going on in the last couple of days, and it was also a holiday weekend. I know a lot of folks were off. So I wanted to give a quick update on where we're at with the dirty debt ceiling deal, because there's been some big changes in just the last couple of hours, a couple of days, and lots to do right now. So let's get right to it. So if you were tuned out over the weekend or you're just catching up, basically what happened is for the last several weeks, we've been calling on President Biden, as have many other climate and environmental groups, as have nearly 100 progressive members of the House and Senate, calling on President Biden not to negotiate a deal with Republicans over the debt ceiling, and instead just to use either the 14th Amendment to the Constitution or other existing powers that the president has to avoid a debt ceiling default and sort of obviate this whole conversation. Unfortunately, President Biden did not listen to us, and over the weekend announced that he had made a deal with Speaker McCarthy, which we only found out the kind of details or the substance of late on Sunday night. But it does unfortunately include a lot of pieces of the dirty debt ceiling deal we've been warning you about. Particularly, it includes the parts that Joe Manchin had in his original dirty deal back in 2022, which would require the Mountain Valley Pipeline to be given special permits and also to be exempted from several parts of the legal process so that they can build the pipeline, even though they keep losing in court over their permits and applications, and they keep having permits called back and reapplied for them. So it will require the Mountain Valley Pipeline to be built. That's very bad. It also includes some rollbacks to the National Environmental Policy Act, in particular, how long you have to file court cases using NEPA after a project is proposed. And then, of course, it has a lot of other bad stuff in there. It makes it harder for some Americans to access food stamps and parts of the social safety net. So overall, very bad deal for Democrats and for President Biden. But he did negotiate it, and now it's out as a draft bill. And it's safe to say that the weakest part of the deal that Biden and McCarthy negotiated is the Mountain Valley Pipeline portions. There's a couple of reasons why. One is not that many people in Congress like Joe Manchin, and Joe Manchin's the only one who really likes the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Republican members of Congress don't like Joe Manchin because he is technically a Democrat, even though we don't like him very much either. And Democrats don't like Joe Manchin because he's supporting all this pro-fossil fuel policy. And in the case of the Mountain Valley Pipeline, he's gained a bunch of exemptions just for that one project, just for the Mountain Valley Pipeline. No other gas pipeline, no other oil pipeline, and certainly no other clean energy project would get this kind of preferential treatment from the government. And so there's a lot of folks in Congress who are kind of annoyed at that, and they're kind of annoyed at Joe Manchin for having gotten a special sweetheart deal from the White House about his personal pet pipeline, but they don't get the same kind of treatment. So in addition to being a bad, dirty deal, we think it's weak on the parts where it's being really favorable to the MVP and not to anything else or to any other member of Congress except for Joe Manchin. So the good news is we've already got some pushback going on how to amend the dirty deal to be better. The entire Virginia delegation in the U.S. House of Representatives, all the Democrats at least, as well as Senator Tim Kaine, also from Virginia, have all said they're going to introduce amendments, which will roll back, in particular, the Mountain Valley Pipeline portions of the dirty deal. And as we've been saying for about 2 weeks now, there are almost 100 Democrats in the House and in the Senate who have signed on to various letters and calls to action asking President Biden not to do this kind of dirty deal. So we know if there's a chance to vote on amendments to clean up the dirty debt ceiling deal and instead pass a clean debt ceiling bill, there are a bunch of folks who would be happy to vote for that, co-sponsor amendments, and work towards that goal. Now, as I record this video, the House Rules Committee is just meeting this afternoon to decide what amendments will be allowed and voted on as part of the House process over the next day or two. And then that whole thing will have to happen again in a couple of days, maybe over the weekend or maybe early next week in the U.S. Senate. So there'll be several different chances to amend a dirty deal as we go along, but we don't know exactly which amendments will be offered, how they'll be formulated, and which ones may be denied or turned aside in the process. So we're going to stay focused on the idea of amending the dirty deal because we think that's our best chance in the next 2 or 3 days to change the dirty deal, make it at least less dirty, and possibly if we can introduce enough amendments, we could actually strip all the stuff out of the dirty debt ceiling deal except for raising the debt ceiling, And that might actually get more votes than any of these other individual processes. Especially, again, the weakest link is the Mountain Valley Pipeline stuff, because that really only benefits Joe Manchin, and it really only benefits that one pipeline. And so very few other representatives and senators would be opposed to stripping that out of the debt ceiling deal. Other things like the NEPA rollbacks and the food stamp changes, those may be harder to get, especially Republican votes for, but it's not out of the question that if we go through a couple of rounds of amendments, Speaker McCarthy or Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer are looking at the vote counts and going, I don't have the votes to pass a debt ceiling bill with all of this other stuff attached. They may go back to trying to introduce a clean debt ceiling bill that just raises the nation's borrowing limit for the next 2 years and doesn't do any of this other extraneous stuff that was in the Biden-McCarthy deal. And that would be really good. But we think the best way to get there is to ask senators and representatives to amend the deal, as opposed to just asking them to vote no. Because if they vote no, then they are voting not to raise the nation's borrowing limit, and they're risking a serious default, which would have huge impacts on global economy and a lot of people in this country, including everybody who gets not only food stamps, but Social Security, veterans who get pensions, all kinds of stuff would be impacted if the U.S. were to default on its debt. So we're not quite there where we want to encourage people to vote no on raising the debt limit, but we do think there's lots of opportunities for them to vote yes on various amendments that will make the dirty debt ceiling deal cleaner and maybe even get us all the way to a clean debt ceiling bill. That's what we've always wanted them to do. That's what President Biden does still have the option to take action on unilaterally through the 14th Amendment and other options. So if they do end up voting down this bill a couple of times, or they can't get it through the House in the next 48 hours, we will expect to turn up pressure on Biden again to use the 14th Amendment or something similar to just blow away this whole conversation and raise the nation's borrowing limit without an act of Congress. But for the next couple of days, the best and safest thing is to try and get them to clean up the bill and strip out all the extraneous stuff, especially all the stuff that's starting with the Mountain Valley Pipeline and then the other environmental issues. So we've got our call page updated. You can call now or click the link in the blog post or the email to get connected. And that'll give you some quick talking points based on whether your representative and senators are Democrats or Republicans, basically breaking down the same information I just gave you, that we think Democrats will be most susceptible to the argument, hey, we should just pass a clean debt ceiling bill. We don't need all of this dirty deal stuff that Biden negotiated with McCarthy. For Republicans, really zeroing in on the Mountain Valley Pipeline, that weakest part of the deal, in our opinion, and getting them to vote for that first as a stepping stone to chipping away the other pieces of the bill that are bad and leaving us with just a clean debt ceiling bill at the end of the day. You can make calls now through the call-in link or the phone number. And if you can, please chip in. We're making these calls free all this week for anybody who wants to make them, so that as many people as possible can call. And we're working with a lot of groups, especially a lot of the frontline MVP fighting groups, to make sure that our voices are heard by Congress this week, because this is really a critical moment in the Mountain Valley Pipeline fight. Thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.